58 days later, and there's still no arrest or even a named suspect. Digital sleuth Chris McDonough spent weeks piecing this together, but the officials who could provide answers aren't saying a word. McDonough insists this case is vital because any veteran detective will give you the same reality check. That initial sweep of a crime scene dictates everything. Nail the basics and a case forms. Slip up just once and you're playing catch-up. Looking at this probe now, that's precisely what he claims derailed the Nancy Guthrie investigation. The family touched every single bit of evidence before the police arrived. People are demanding to know why 58 days represents more than just a calendar date. For abduction cases, Bureau protocols confirm the odds of finding someone alive drop hourly, and after 72 hours pass, the entire scope of work pivots from a life-saving rescue to a far darker, uncertain mission. 2 months later, the initial frenzy has faded into a slow crawl through electronic files, genetic archives, plus grainy security clips that might, or might not, show the specific vehicle from that night. After 2 months, the police stopped talking for weeks. That radio silence speaks volumes. Occasionally, no news means the team is finally getting close, tracing a lead so fragile that any public word could ruin it. Other times, it signals the trail has gone cold, turning into the nightmare scenario no one admits. Then there's the third possibility, which is exactly what internet sleuths are currently suggesting, supported not by gossip, but by established, professional investigative standards. It implies the probe is stuck on a specific path that was set during those crucial opening hours, and yet nobody has stopped to reevaluate that foundation. This is the exact point digital analyst Chris McDonough, known online as True Crime Bab, has been meticulously outlining in his deep dive analysis. Whether he's actually a licensed private eye hasn't been officially confirmed. While he works mostly on the web, his core observations matter because they highlight a factual pattern. This exists within the official files and has just been confirmed by an expert who carries far more weight. But first, we need to make one thing perfectly clear. This story isn't about blaming the victim's family. Back on February 16, 2026, Sheriff Chris Nanos explicitly stated that the Guthrie family was cleared, removing every sibling and spouse from the suspect list. He was totally direct. They've been incredibly helpful throughout this ordeal and are strictly victims here, he noted. Hinting at anything else is both factually incorrect and just plain heartless. He told reporters that foreign DNA found in Nancy's house didn't match her or anyone in her inner circle. They are innocent. That part is over. The real mystery, ignored by officials for 58 days, is how the actual investigation was handled. When nobody is in handcuffs yet, the procedural steps taken become the most vital factor. Rewind to the night of January 31st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie pulled out of her driveway in the Tucson foothills around 5:32 p.m. She caught a ride to her daughter's place for a standard Saturday night of food and games. Detectives eventually tracked down and questioned the person who drove her there. Sheriff Nanos officially confirmed the news, though the specifics of that sit-down remain entirely shielded from the public eye. Nancy spent that night hanging out with her kin, including Annie and her spouse, Toamaso Chian, before being dropped off between 9:45 and 9:48 p.m. The verified police timeline, cited by several news outlets, marks her arrival at 9:48 that evening. Up went the garage. 2 minutes later, it shut. No one outside would realize anything was wrong for nearly 14 hours. At 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, the Ring camera cut out. Not from a glitch, but because someone stood there. By 2:12 a.m., another security lens caught movement. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker, which pings heart stats to her smartphone, lost its connection completely. That device, ping, is the most solid evidence detectives have for a specific kidnapping window. This was an 84-year-old lady with major physical hurdles who needed daily heart meds and whose back was so damaged that reaching the mailbox was her absolute limit on a rare good day. Her trail went cold. Her cell, her handbag, and her vital pills were all still sitting inside. At 11:56 the next morning, a friend noticed Nancy missed their regular Sunday digital church meeting. She called the relatives. Annie and Cameron Guthrie rushed to their mother's place. They spent about an hour searching the property before anyone finally called 911. That call arrived at 12:03 p.m. Puma County deputies reached the scene at 12:15, 12 minutes after calling, and roughly an hour after the family first stepped through the front door. That gap should have been the primary question, because for any detective, keeping a scene pristine is no minor detail. It is the foundation. Detectives are taught to treat any violent crime site with the understanding that every single thing, every shifted item, every flat surface, every open door or dirty window is vital. They view anyone entering that space beforehand as a wild variable, something that can't be fixed or taken back. Their identities really don't matter. Even if investigators are sure they are innocent, it changes nothing. Protocol is everything because evidence is fragile. You either protect it or you lose it. In this situation, the police weren't the ones to first enter the scene. Family got there. When Annie and Cameron found the house that morning, 3 red flags proved this wasn't just a medical crisis. Every back door of Nancy's home was left wide open. Blood stained the front step, and the Ring camera had been violently torn from the siding. Savannah Guthrie shared these facts for the first time during her March 26, 2026 talk with Hoda Kotb on Today, her very first public statement since the disappearance began. She talked about the family's initial shock. They figured Nancy might have suffered a medical crisis during the night, and that medics had already wheeled her away. They interpreted the entire situation through a harmless lens initially, but once they saw the blood, the reality hit them. Former FBI investigator Jennifer Coffin-Daffer, examining those propped open doors, suggested they likely indicate the killers entered from the back and deliberately left the entrance ajar for tactical reasons, perhaps as a quick escape or to let in accomplices. Considering we now have a fresh detail that the door was held open, I seriously doubt Nancy was the one who propped it. Nancy was well aware of the javelinas and local wildlife, which is why she installed a nest cam. But is it possible the suspects held it open to give others access? Retired NYPD Detective Michael Alcazar went even further, arguing that a door left open like that suggests multiple attackers rather than someone working solo. These expert opinions rely completely on the public account Savannah gave about what her family found, since that is the only record we have of how those doors looked that morning. The relatives described the scene to the deputies as soon as they showed up. The police never actually saw the state of those doors for themselves. This was the trend. Every initial detail from that crime scene during those first few hours was seen only through the perspective of the first people there. The entryways, the bloodstains, the missing camera, and the specific way each item was discovered. The detectives who arrived at 12:15 p.m. were entering a scene that had already been disturbed both physically and mentally by the family. Next, let us look at the ransom theory, because this is where the trend gets really interesting. Within hours of Nancy being reported as a missing person, while the police were still working the scene, Savannah reached out to her brother, Cameron. He was already suspicious, a fact she confirmed during that March 26th Today interview. To quote her directly, Cameron was convinced right away. Even while on the phone with her, he was certain their mother was taken for a payout. And even during that first call I made to him, he just knew. He was sure. He told me, "I think she has been snatched for money." This was before any note ever turned up, before the authorities had even defined the nature of the case, and before Nanos ever held a press briefing. The family had already decided this was a kidnapping for ransom, and they passed that specific narrative along to the detectives from the moment they arrived. 2 days after Nancy vanished, on February 3rd, the first demand for money appeared. KOLD-TV in Tucson received it via their tip portal, and TMZ got a copy that same day. A second message reached KOL on February 6th from a different IP, but it used the same type of masking software. Both of those notes contained specific details about the inside of Nancy Guthrie's house that had not been made public, like the exact spot her Apple Watch was found, and details about an interior floodlight. FBI Special Agent in Charge, Keith Janke, verified the Bureau was taking at least one letter seriously, because it mentioned specific deadlines and a request for cash. TMZ's Harvey Levin, the person who got that initial letter, mentioned how the exactness was really quite shocking. Everything is written flawlessly, featuring complex organization and deep meaning. The mention of that smart timepiece was exactly what grabbed the FBI's attention, he pointed out, explaining that it pointed to the device's hidden spot, a location nobody would have guessed right away. This remains a major point that investigators haven't cleared up for the public yet. Police haven't officially stated if those messages were sent by the actual individual holding Nancy, or just a person with intimate house details who played no part in the snatching. These letters bring up specific facts which, at that particular moment, were only known to those who had been inside the residence. Detectives haven't shared the names of those specific individuals with the general public. Back on February 7th, Savannah joined Annie and Cameron on social media to address their mom's captor in a joint video. "Your point came through loud and clear, and we get it," Savannah stated. "Please, just let our mom come home. We will give you whatever you want because she means everything. We heard you out and we are on the same page. Give us our mother back so our family can be whole again. We need this closure to find any rest. We are ready to settle up because she is priceless." By making that choice, those relatives basically backed the kidnapping story before the cops had even made it official. When the kin treated those letters as authentic in front of everyone and went on record saying they got the memo and were reacting to it, it cemented the idea of an abduction for cash as the main theory for both the masses and the detectives. Come March 26th, about 8 weeks after the start, Savannah told Hodakov she thinks only a couple of those demands were real, while the rest were just scammers. Authorities haven't held a briefing to update anyone on those letters since the case first kicked off. Not one department has verified which of the writings, if any, were actually penned by Nancy Guthrie's kidnapper. Still, that whole ransom narrative pushed by the family early on was only bolstered by their social media reactions, and then supported even more by Savannah's big sit-down, keeping that theory at the very heart of the entire mystery. A retired FBI pro named Harry Trumbadus explained to Yahoo News that the money for freedom theory seems more doubtful as the clock keeps ticking. It is just too complicated. He mentioned that there are simply too many risks for a criminal to get busted. Several ex-federal agents have pointed out how weird it is that the abductor hasn't reached out directly. There is no verified way to talk, and sending still alive proof to news crews instead of the family is bizarre for a real hostage situation. In standard snatch and grabs for cash, they say the orders come fast and straight to the point. This level of confusion isn't typically how these types of crimes are handled. This is a total outlier. Regardless, the idea of a payout sticks because the relatives brought it up first and keep backing it in public. If this breakdown is the kind of insight that keeps you hooked on the story, don't go anywhere. We are getting to a revelation that has officially been verified at last, not by some internet sleuth, but by a high-ranking official from the Puma County Sheriff's Office. His specific remarks regarding the inquiry fundamentally alter the perspective of our entire prior conversation. We will get to that chat momentarily. Let us examine the official police interactions with the relatives early on, as those details are crucial. During February 16th, Nanos publicly exonerated the relatives and simultaneously outlined exactly how they had assisted the ongoing probe. Speaking with Cole, he noted that they had conducted interviews. Mobile devices and personal computers were handed over. They went all out, searching both their cars and their residences. He further mentioned their total helpfulness, leading to their quick exclusion as suspects. Police executed a legal warrant to search Annie Guthrie's place in Arizona on February 7th, which was later openly acknowledged and labeled by local law enforcement as a routine part of the process. Around the middle of February, federal officers went door to door near Annie's house, searching for leads right after that video of the disguised individual went public. Someone else was held for questioning and had his Rio Rico home inspected. He eventually walked free, with 0 counts against him, later expressing his desire for the actual culprit to be caught. That is just basic detective work. Start with those closest and expand. Electronics, laptops, and automobiles. Any legitimate probe begins by looking at the inner circle and their immediate surroundings. This does not imply guilt. It is simply following the rules. Yet McDonough is highlighting the broader patterns forming from these standard steps in this particular instance. The entire sequence relied heavily on the relatives choosing to help. They gave up their tech and allowed access to their property. They painted the picture of the event and suggested the motive. It was the family who mostly decided if the ransom notes were actually legitimate. While the police branched out to talk to nearby residents, the relatives issued a message on March 21st, urging the local community to assist. They asked people to check their security videos, look through old texts, or recall any strange interactions that might matter now. Those words echo the internal chatter that Brian Anton heard from his police contacts. There is a firm, ongoing hunch that the perpetrator lives right there in Tucson, maybe even within that very same block. To what extent did the police reach that same conclusion on their own? Or did the family's narrative slowly seep in and shape the detective's worldview? We still do not have a public answer to that dilemma. However, this concern is no longer coming just from internet sleuths. In the last 72 hours, the entire direction of this case has truly changed. A few days back, on March 27, 2026, Dr. Richard Carmona was a guest on Brian Anton's show. Carmona is far more than a simple pundit. He is no amateur blogger. He actually held the office of the 17th Surgeon General. For 30 years, he worked with Pima County law enforcement, even commanding their tactical unit. He was once the head of that very agency. He understands the exact way evidence should be handled in that neck of the woods. His televised comments were as blunt a call-out against the investigation's honesty as any high-ranking official has ever gone on record saying. Carmona told reporters the thing that bothered him the most, the thing that left us all stunned, was the moment Sheriff Nanos announced on the news that he personally unsealed the area at Nancy Guthrie's Foothills home. That simply isn't a task for a sheriff, Carmona noted. The lead detective on the ground is the one who clears the area after deciding every piece of evidence needed has been shot, bagged, tagged, and filed away for the case. A sheriff declaring, "The reopening of a live crime scene on TV isn't standard. It breaks the procedural wall built specifically to keep command decisions from ruining the integrity of forensic work." Nanos then resealed the area for a deeper look, a move that Carmona argued was basically useless. Once the scene is tainted, the whole thing is over. He noted, "You can't rebuild a crime scene." And Carmona wasn't even done yet. He also mentioned footage that went viral, showing a pizza delivery car rolling over Nancy Guthrie's lawn during the peak of the investigation. If you go to trial, any defense lawyer is going to say that the scene was compromised. You had guys delivering food. How do we trust the proof? You just can't fix a blown scene. Once the perimeter is breached, it is finished, because you failed to protect the integrity of that crime space that the lead investigators say are vital to finding any evidence that is actually relevant to this murder case. But still, this comes from the highest lawman in town, the sheriff, making you ask, what is he doing? Every one of us was just baffled by some of his public comments. He then went beyond the scene to question the public's faith in the sheriff's own word. When you have a leader who has to keep fixing his story every day, the community loses trust in you. You can't lead without faith. He brought up another issue too. Nanos apparently chose to send evidence to a private Florida lab instead of the FBI to save money. Carmona made clear that federal forensic labs help local cops for $0. He claimed it was a budget move, Carmona said. But the FBI is free. Our taxes are already paying for that. That call to skip the FBI lab for a private site in a case where the Bureau is one of the lead agencies is the kind of bureaucratic mess that defense lawyers use to challenge evidence in court. Whether that was a major blunder or a managerial one, it shows exactly the kind of institutional shakiness that Carmona believes destroys the community's faith in this probe. Those remarks didn't happen in a vacuum. Carmona's words follow a massive wave of internal pressure building against Nanos for many weeks. On March 24, 2026, 6 days ago, representing over 300 Sheriff's Office personnel, the Pima County Deputies Association held a unified vote to officially declare they have zero faith in Nanos, demanding he step down right away. This isn't coming from external detractors. These are the very people working under him. In a different turn of events, the Arizona Republic uncovered that Nanos actually left the El Paso police force back in 1982, a full 2 years prior to the date claimed on his official bio, apparently to dodge being fired for conduct violations, which involved things like brutality, refusing orders, and betting while off the clock. The sheriff's office tried to brush off the timeline gap as just a simple paperwork mistake. This past Tuesday, 3 days back, Pima County supervisors reached a total consensus to force Nanos into a sworn deposition, using an old-school law from the territory days that might just get him kicked out of his position. Pima County leader Matt Hines informed Newsweek that Nanos basically spit on the confidence the public had in his leadership. As for Nanos, he isn't buying any of the backlash. Talking with KVOA, he stood firm, stating he doesn't feel bad at all about how his squad handled things. He claimed there are no second thoughts regarding releasing the crime scene early or anything else along those lines. He called the whole thing ridiculous. Whether that sounds like a solid defense or a major red flag really depends on whose perspective you're listening to. It is crucial to point out, though, that having a current sheriff dealing with an internal revolt from his staff, a legally mandated interrogation by the board, and a heavy call-out from a former United States Surgeon General who once held his same job. That is anything but a standard atmosphere for an inquiry. This is a probe happening while the entire system is basically falling apart at the seams. And that kind of chaos definitely impacts how we look at the proof. So, let's dive into the actual forensic data that stands on its own, separate from anything the family has claimed. Federal agents teamed up with Google to pull video from the Ring camera located at the victim's house. Somebody had clearly messed with the hardware itself. The unit was literally ripped right off the siding, yet the recordings had already hit the cloud and were still sitting on Google's servers. The video captures a suspicious individual on the porch, wearing a dark face mask. He walks up to the entrance, blocks the lens with a gloved hand, then piles up some bushes to totally hide the camera's line of sight. The guy has a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiking bag on his back, a specific pack that was only available at Walmart when the probe began. Even though Nanos eventually admitted during a March 2nd sit-down with NBC that the bag might have come from somewhere else, questioning if maybe it was just something picked up secondhand on eBay. That is the angle they are exploring. He is decked out in gloves and a mask, sporting a handgun in a peculiar middle-waist draw that experts say is a dead giveaway. The Federal Bureau of Investigation. Tech experts estimate his height at roughly 5'9" to 5'10", with a medium frame. The Bureau also put out another photo, where the bag and the gun are nowhere to be seen. Detectives are pretty sure that snapshot was captured on another occasion, which hints that this guy was casing the place well before she actually vanished. Ex-Pima County Detective Kurt Dabb mentioned to Parade that the amount of prep work seen on tape, carrying a loaded pack, showing up armed, and doing dry runs really points to someone who knew exactly what they were doing. You don't see thieves breaking into homes with loaded packs. This was definitely a snatching, per his statement. Authorities have likewise backed up claims to news outlets that the individual of interest likely scouted the residence starting as early as January 11th, while detectives are urging folks nearby to scan there. Security clips from that day, as well as January 31st and the crack of dawn on February 1st. Extra monitoring gear at the victim's estate, a lens aimed at the rear entrance, a second unit tracking the car path and main bays, got seized and analyzed by the police force. Such devices, based on media reports, recorded weeks of data preceding the abduction. Relatives, gardeners, maintenance crews, not a single thing looked off. That disguised figure from the door cam didn't show up in any other clips. Cops are working through a data-heavy scene with full logs of everyone visiting the site. Yet so far, no handcuffs have been slapped on anyone at this point. Current biological samples have put the inquiry in a fascinating spot. During the initial phase of the probe, a dark mitten found roughly 2 miles from the house turned into a major focal point. It seemed to match the handwear seen on the perpetrator in the porch video, and it carried traces of a random guy's genetic code, which went into the federal system, the Bureau's massive repository housing. Records for over 19 million convicted criminals. But it came up empty. Agents subsequently turned to ancestral DNA tracking methods, utilizing the same tech that finally solved the cold case of that famous California predator. However, according to the latest verified accounts, the local sheriff's office revealed the material on the glove didn't point to a culprit, rather a nearby diner worker who was cleared of any involvement. That trail is cold. What stays active is the biological trace found within the residence, a jumbled genetic signature that isn't from the victim or her inner circle. The sheriff noted in early March that it likely holds traces from multiple sources, creating a hurdle for pulling out a distinct, workable identity for just one individual. Detectives mentioned they ran parts of the sample through the crime bank without luck. The official termed it a promising path that requires more patience. Current status: the victim's heart device cut out at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st. That specific time, logged by medical hardware without human bias, stands as the most reliable piece of evidence in the entire file. It signals when she was probably taken and defines the whole timeline for the snatching. A car was spotted on a doorbell video stream, roughly 2.5 miles from the property at 2:36 that same night. Police haven't managed to pinpoint that ride yet, as the sheriff informed the press. It is currently being treated like any other of the countless cars roaming the streets during those early hours. That covers the complete summary after 58 days of police work. A masked man on tape with no identity. Genetic traces from the crime scene that lead to no one. A discarded mitten lead that ended up being a bust, and a single heart monitor timestamp. A mystery car and a local sheriff watching his own precinct crumble while trying to protect a crime scene that his former partner claims is already compromised. This is where Chris McDanough's logic stops being a web theory and starts sounding like a serious problem. McDanough's argument, which he's broken down in various posts, is that the police force has fallen into a mental trap during this probe. It isn't about being crooked or some secret plot. It is a proven psychological habit where the main narrative starts to feed itself. This makes it nearly impossible for detectives to see or use facts that don't fit the script. He specifically claims the team is just following the family's lead instead of the evidence. To use his words, the family's role as the first ones on the scene, the ones who started the theory, and the loudest public face of the case has steered the probe in ways that haven't been scrutinized. His background isn't totally verified. He is just an online commentator. But the academic proof behind his theory is massive and real, helping us understand what the core issue really is. Back in 2006, professors Keith Findley and Michael Scott from the University of Wisconsin Law School wrote a paper that's now a major part of American justice reform. It covered the different sides of tunnel vision in legal cases, published in the Law Review and used by the Innocence Project, the Canadian Justice Department, and reform groups around the globe. Their main point wasn't that tunnel vision comes from bad or lazy cops. Instead, they showed it is just a natural mental habit for all humans, including the most seasoned forensic experts, which gets dangerous in police work, because those decisions can't be taken back. Findley and Scott say it is caused by several mental tricks happening at once. There is confirmation bias, which makes people twist new info to fit what they already think. Then there is hindsight bias, which makes old choices seem much more right than they actually were, and outcome bias, which makes people judge a decision by the result rather than the process that led to it. Taken together, these habits force investigators to create a story and then filter every new clue through that lens, pushing what fits and burying what doesn't. The research shows this doesn't just hit detectives or lawyers, but professional lab scientists as well. Experts who got a story before looking at evidence, or were told the plot before checking the physical clues, subconsciously changed their findings to match the story they had heard. The National Academy of Sciences found the same thing in a 2009 report. The Innocence Project, looking at over 170 DNA exonerations, found tunnel vision as a common thread in almost every single case. It isn't merely the root of every botched conviction, but the setting where human errors, botched data analysis, ignored tips, and unchallenged theories were allowed to fester long after they should have been dismissed. This is the exact pattern Findley and Scott identified in major media cases. When a probe happens under the intense glare of the public eye, political grandstanding, and constant news cycles, the career and social toll of doubting the official story becomes massive. The victim's family carries a lot of weight. Their sorrow is plain for all to see. They've acted as the most steady and persuasive public figures throughout this entire matter. Disputing their version isn't just a matter of logic. It's happening in a high-profile drama involving one of the most famous news anchors in America. Challenging them would be a professional suicide mission. Academic experts are very clear about this. The rush to get answers fast, coupled with a dominant story, taking hold early on, is the perfect recipe for dangerous tunnel vision. Just look at the specific circumstances of this whole inquiry. Police didn't get to Nancy Guthrie's place until the family had been there for nearly 60 minutes. Their initial understanding of the scene came from people who'd already disturbed it while grieving. The kidnapping angle was pushed by a relative before a note was even found, and then blasted across the news by the family before the feds could even confirm a single letter was real. The relatives became the main source for deciding which clues were actually legitimate. A former sheriff who once ran that very department later called the scene compromised. They sent samples to a private facility in Florida to save money, even though the government provides those labs for $0. The lead investigator was completely bypassed when the sheriff went on television to announce a search. The local law enforcement union actually voted unanimously to oust their own leader. The Board of Supervisors took steps to force people to testify under oath. Now, 58 days later, with all that history, nobody has been charged, there is no suspect, and no reason given for why this home was targeted. McDonough is raising a point that Carmona's latest remarks make impossible to brush off as a conspiracy, and that's whether this inquiry has ever followed. The standard advice found in every criminological textbook for major cases. A formal, structured, deep dive to rethink the facts. A truly outside audit of the main theory, done from a perspective not tied to those first few hours. Not to pin it on the family or ignore the lab results, but to make sure the story told during those initial chaotic moments, the entryways, the blood, the whole ransom story, has been stress-tested instead of just blindly followed. There is a specific name for this procedure in the research. It has been turned into official protocol in countries that have faced the dark reality of tunnel vision in famous cases. For example, Canada. Federal experts pushed this after reviewing nationwide cases of wrongful convictions. Dutch officials built an entire police reform strategy based on this. The Innocence Project demands it whenever public outcries and early rumors cloud a case. As for whether that approach was actually used here, or if anyone from outside the main task force was brought in to challenge the theory instead of confirming it, remains a mystery. This is the official word so far. Nanos informed NBC News in March 2026 that police have a theory on the motive, claiming the residence was definitely singled out, although he cannot state that with 100% certainty. He refused to rule out that the culprit might strike somewhere else. He mentioned sensitive details exist that must stay hidden to avoid ruining the active search. A defense lawyer working out of Las Vegas, Peter Christensen, suggested to Newsweek that the silence likely means police have stopped asking for tips and started focusing on hard data. He noted that when detectives claim they are getting closer, it implies they are done sifting through noise and are now verifying the best leads, tracking digital footprints and lab results. Former FBI Supervisor Lance Lissing informed CBS News that quiet from veteran agents usually indicates they are, finally, making progress, while admitting that evidence fades and leads dry up as more time passes. That might be accurate. The gears could be turning. There could be a secret trail being followed that we simply cannot see yet. However, looking at the evidence that is currently on the record, the entry patterns, the integrity of the crime scene itself, the massive scandal involving the lead sheriff, the dead-end DNA, and the mystery man who vanished after being seen on video. These elements do not exist in isolation. They align with the claims made by internet sleuths, which a former Puma County sheriff corroborated regarding the messy way this entire operation has been managed. A single detail from the CBS report on day 45 of the mystery needs careful review because it hits the heart of the larger doubt about what the police have actually proven on their own. Insiders told CBS that more video was found from the security system at the Tucson home. One lens watched the backyard, and another recorded the driveway and the garage entrance. Those files contained weeks of footage from before the kidnapping. Family members, frequent guests, gardeners, and pool staff. Investigators scrutinized every bit of it. Not a single thing looked suspicious. Most importantly, the masked man from the front door was never seen on those recordings at any point before the abduction. This suggests to the detectives that whoever this person is he was disciplined enough to stay away from. The rear entrances, during the weeks the security system was recording everything. He either knew where the lenses were, or was just incredibly careful. An ex-homicide investigator from Puma named Kurt. Dabb's theory that the house was likely scouted out fits the current evidence. If you have been tracking this investigation so intensely that our breakdown raises fresh doubts instead of solving old mysteries, you realize why these files need a community that keeps itself updated, maintains accuracy, and won't let the stillness have the last say. Post your specific observations below. Skip the rumors. Give us the focused insights gained from monitoring this trial with real rigor. Because 58 days later, without a single capture, while an ex-Puma County sheriff labels the scene compromised, never has the need for genuine answers felt more vital than it does right now. As the investigation stands now, the truth feels closer than ever, yet still just out of reach. Each clue uncovered has only deepened the mystery, raising new questions that refuse to stay buried. What once seemed like silence now echoes with hidden voices, fragments of a story waiting to be fully exposed. Those involved can no longer outrun the growing weight of suspicion. And as more pieces fall into place, one thing becomes clear. This isn't over. Not even close. The truth is coming, and when it does, it won't just reveal what happened. It will change everything.